Hello friends. This is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto met his mother and discovered a new summon power in the Forest of Death? Episode 3. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, during the dangerous Chūnin Exams, Naruto's journey takes an unexpected turn in the Forest of Death. A mysterious encounter with his mother's chakra changes his destiny forever and awakens a summoning contract unlike anything the shinobi world has ever seen. Now, let's start. The next two combatants walked down as they Karui was a dark-skinned kunoichi with long spiky red hair and amber eyes who wore a long, short-sleeved dress with frilly edges complete with something that looked like the Kumogakure flak jacket, two simple yellow earrings, fishnet stockings, thigh-high boots with white soles and a hitai which she wears like a bandana, and she was carrying a long sword on her back. On the other hand, Shizuka was a fair-skinned girl of average height with an athletic yet curvaceous build with green eyes and waist-length black hair in a home-style cut tied in a high ponytail with short bangs and chin-length strands framing her face. She wore a black hitai and wore her village's form-fitting kunoichi uniform, which was gray-colored with a right shoulder guard, gray gloves, and an opening in her shirt, which revealed some of her sizable cleavages. May the 11th match begin, Hayate called out as both kunoichi charged at each other. Naruto once more glared down at the Kumo ninja as the blonde Kumo Jinchuriki walked over to Naruto. "Why are you glaring at my teammate brother?" she asked Naruto. Naruto looked at her with narrowed eyes. "How about that Kumo tried to kidnap a good friend of mine when she was younger as well as my mother when she was younger," Naruto said to his sibling of burden. "And let me not forget that my clan's homeland is no more than rubble because of your village," he hissed as his Rinnegan looked into the Kumo Jinchuriki. Yo, you got to let that go. Our villages are seeking peace, so set your mind at ease," the Kumo-sensei rapped at Naruto, who looked at him with a raised bow. "My brother brought the body of the man back, and he would like to apologize for the attack," he added as the female Jinchuriki sighed. "Sorry about my sensei," she said as she bowed to the ninja who looked at the man. "He dreams of becoming a world-famous rapper," she added as the man looked over to her. "Yugito, why are you being harsh, so stop being an ass," he told her as the now-named Yugito's eyes started to twitch. Naruto let the words from both of them go through his head. And he knew that they were telling the truth. Naruto looked to his mother, who looked at him with a caring smile. She even turned to Diana, and she was still smiling at him, so Naruto let out a sigh. "I apologize for what I was doing," Naruto said as he bowed to his Jinchuriki siblings. Both Yugito and her sensei turned to him and looked at him. Sakura smiled before she turned to Yugito. "You said that Naruto was your brother, so does that mean?" she asked her. "That were Jinchuriki?" Yugito asked Sakura, who nodded. "Yep, I'm the Jinchuriki of Matabi the Nibi," Yugito said as Sakura looked both amazed and confused. "And so were most of the people. Now my name, know my fame, don't be lame," the Kumo-sensei started to rap as his students sighed. "Eight tails, that's me, da rapping, Killer Bee, Jinchuriki of Gyuki," the now Killer Bee said as everyone looked at him. "You named your Biju?" Kakashi asked them as they both looked at him confused. No, they were named by the Rakuto Sennin," Killer Bee said as people looked amazed. He then looked at Naruto's eyes, and with the eyes of Thin Nin, Bee added, "But Yugito beat him." "With your Rinnegan being the eyes of the Rakuto Sennin," Yugito told Naruto as the blonde going crimson nodded. "Yay, he came to me and told me before blessing me and my children with the Rinnegan," Naruto told her as Yugito looked amazed before he turned to Sakura. "And no, I do not know the name of the Kyuubi," he told her as she nodded. Karui and Shizuka were fighting Kanaita Katana, neither giving an inch to the other. Shizuka then slipped past the katana, kicked away from the Kumo Kunoichi to the side, and held a kunai at Karui's throat. Hayate walked over to them and saw that Shizuka had another kunai to Karui's liver and called out, "Winner Shizuka of Nadeshiko village." Shizuka removed the kunai, bowed to Karui and then returned to her team as Karui did the same, cursing her way up the stairs as the names shuffled once more. Artemis looked over to B with a smile. "Your student did good," she said as B nodded, "but I think her opponent was holding back," Artemis added as B nodded once more. "What do you mean she matched her?" Samui said as she walked over. "Exactly. Think back what you said, and you will realize that it's a fact she won," B said. People looked confused as they all turned to Artemis. "If I'm right that Shizuka is the princess of Nadeshiko and was trained to take down a platoon of genin," Artemis said as B nodded, "and so that means that she matched your teammate so that she would not feel down on herself," the goddess told as Samui nodded. "That is both cool and not cool at the same time," Samui said before Naruto laughed as Samui turned to him. "What?" she asked Naruto. "Just a thought. And it's that if she was fighting a shinobi, would she fight on the same level? Or would she go all out on them?" Naruto asked aloud. "And I just find that funny, Datbeo," he added as Artemis turned to him. "And you were right as the law of that village," Artemis said as Naruto looked at her and saw that she had a tweaking eye. "What is it?" Naruto asked her. "Your grandfather beat a Nadeshiko kunoichi once. And instead of following their rules, he told her that she must not follow them, and so she saw that their students or children would fight, and if he had a son and beat her daughter, they must marry," Artemis growled as Naruto looked at his mother confused. "Then when asking to become Aloys, the daughter of the woman that your grandfather defeated, met your father who turned her down, and now her daughter is here. And I can't help but think that this time it's going to stick," she added as glared at the ground. "Which grandfather?" Naruto asked her. "Your father's father," Diana growled as the next two names were picked out. Gurren of Kusa vs Omoi of Kumo. Omoi is a young, dark-skinned Kumo nin with short, spiky, white hair and dark eyes accentuated with eyelashes curving upwards from the corners. He wore a dark outfit consisting of an overlong shirt with a hood, red bandage handguards, Kumogakure shin guards, a black Hitai-8, and something that looked like a Kumogakure flak jacket, and he carried a long sword on his back. Gurren wore a short teal kimono with a gray turtleneck and short sleeves with a jade green rope belt around her waist, red shorts, light purple wristbands and navy blue sandals. She had strands of hair that framed her face were shorter with dark teal Hitai-8 on her right bicep. Hayate stood in the middle of the two of them as he looked between them before he raised his hand. "Begin," he called out as he jumped back. Omoi drew his sword and started running at Gurren before he froze. He could not move. "Wow," Naruto muttered as he looked down at the battlefield. People looked amazed by what they saw. From under Gurren's feet and covering Omoi from the waist down is covered in crystal. "Is this a Kekkei Genkai?" Kakashi asked as he looked at it with his dojutsu. "She sent her chakra across the floor to make it crystal, and Omoi stepped on it. She trapped him," Yugito said as she shook her head. Naruto narrowed his Rinnegan as he looked at the crystal before drawing everyone's attention. "It's a Kekkei Genkai, all right, and it's made of earth release and something else, but I'm having trouble seeing what that other is," Naruto told them as they looked amazed. "You can see that?" Asuma asked him and Naruto at the blonde going crimson's nod. Asuma looked down. "Does the other element have a color?" he asked Naruto. Naruto looked intensely at the crystal, so much so that his veins bulged near his temples. Lee turned to his teammate and cocked his head to the side. "Is he activating Byakugan?" he asked Neji, who looked at Naruto. "It looks like it," Neji said as he blinked at Naruto. "No, he's using a technique from a Mangekyo Sharingan," Diana said as she decided to watch for a while. "It only looks like he's using the Byakugan," she said as Neji nodded. The veins around Naruto's eyes returned to normal after he blinked a few times. All right, I have it, Naruto said as the people around him turned to him. Crystal releases made up of both earth release and lightning release, Naruto told them as they looked down at the crystals. Omoi tried to move as he called electricity to his sword. I can't lose because if I do, Kumo will be seen as weak, and then Raikage-sama will punish the one responsible by having them help B-sensei make a rap video, Omoi yelled out as everyone looked at Omoi questionably. Naruto and Sakura looked at each other, then turned to Diana, who looked confused. Kakashi blinked and cocked his head to the side. Tenten looked at Neji, who shrugged. Kurenai shook her head at what was just said. Hinata looked confused. Temari looked at her sensei, who looked amazed by the stupidity of the Kumo nin. There he goes again, Karui said as Choji turned to her. What do you mean? He asked her. Omoi has this habit of being pessimistic and blowing it out of proportion, Yugito said as the other Kumo ninja nodded. Hayate walked over to Omoi. Can you move? He asked the Kumo genin, who shook his head. Winner of the 12th match goes to Gurren of Kusa, he called out as he turned to Gurren. He pointed at the crystal around Omoi, and then it broke off him as they both walked back to their teams, with Omoi walking back with his head hung low. The names got shuffled once more as Omoi returned to his team and found them talking to the Konoha ninja. What happened while I was down there? Did B-sensei Current the Konoha nin believe that he could make music? Omoi asked before he was dummy slapped by said person. But before something could be said, the next names were picked quickly. Temari of Suna versus Kintsuchi. The remaining Oto ninja walked down as Temari jumped down and unconnected her fan from her back. As Kin reached the battlefield and met Temari there, she looked ready to fight as she placed her hand in her pouch. Begin, Hayate called out as he jumped back, and Kin threw Senbon at Temari, who moved her fan in front of her and opened it to show a purple circle, and a blast of wind blew the Senbon away. First moon, Temari said as Kin's eyes shot wide. Wind release, she muttered as she looked at Temari, who nodded. She then looked up at her sensei to see snake-like eyes looking down at her. And they held a message. Do not fail me. So Kin pulled out more Senbon and threw them at Temari, who opened her fan more to show a second purple circle and send a blast of wind out that sent the Senbon back again, but this time it was more powerful. Kin had some of the Senbon stuck in her second moon, Temari said as she looked at Kin. There is only one left before I end this match, so do yourself a favor and quit now, she told the Oto Kunoichi. But Kin, even though she knew she would not hit Suna Kunoichi, sent more Senbon out. Still, Temari fully opened her fan and sent another gust of wind. Third moon, she said before she took hold of her fan and waved it in Kin's direction. Kamedachi no Jutsu, Temari called out as she sent out currents of wind to collide with each other, making something that looked a cyclone that had Kin trapped in the center. Kin was getting cut up by the countless blades of wind within the cyclone. She was getting hit at all sides by wind currents. She did not know what was happening before her world went dark. As she fell, Temari closed her fan, and Kin fell on it with her back, landing on the fan. Temari was named the winner as she walked back up. That match was brutal, Naruto muttered as people around him nodded. It goes to show that there are people younger than yourself but stronger, Kurenai said as the other sensei nodded. Cameron Yuminohara vs Kiba Inuzuka. If you can guess who Cameron Yuminohara is, you may have a cookie. The Kiri female Jinchuriki walked down, as did Kurenai's final student and Hana's little brother. Like most of his clan, Kiba has messy brown hair, sharp black eyes with vertical slit-like pupils, pronounced canine teeth, and nails that he can change into claws. He also has the distinctive red fang markings of the Inuzuka clan on his cheeks. Kiba's attire consisted of dark grayish pants reaching to his calves and a gray, hooded fur-lined coat, with the hood usually placed on his head, with a blue forehead protector and blue sandals. At his side was his Ninken partner, who was a small dog with white and some brown fur on his ears and resembled a Great Pyrenees. He was being carried on Kiba's head with the dog's eyes squinted, appearing closed, and he had a brown nose, as well as brown patches on his ears and a brown outline around his mouth, and the fur on top of his head is styled to somewhat resemble a mohawk. Cameron and Kiba stood in the middle as Hayate looked them over before setting his gaze on Cameron. She looks familiar, he thought as he raised his hand. May the 14th match begin, Hayate called out. Shikyaku no Jutsu, Kiba called out as he sank to the floor on all fours with chakra coming off him. Cameron looked at him with no emotion as Kiba growled at her before she held out her hand, gained a puff of smoke, and a weapon appeared. It looked to be a cross between a trident, a Bishaman Yari, a Japanese spear, and a ji, a Chinese halberd, with a crystalline appearance that bears a blue horsehair tassel. Similarly, the two side blades are straight with concave edges as opposed to the usual crescent blades of the Bishaman Yari, and the end of the trident turns into a corkscrew shape. But she just held the trident in her hand as she twirled it, and water formed from the corkscrew bottom at the end. Kiba did not heed the trident as he threw something at his Ninken, who ate it, and it turned the dog's fur red. You ready, Akamaru? Kiba growled at the hound as both ran at Cameron. She spun her trident around as water spewed out of the corkscrew, forming a circle of water and making a mirror out of the water before she hooked one of the trident's blades on the mirror and flipped around. After a few turns and a second, Kiba and Akamaru came out of the mirror. As the copies ran into the real ones, they pushed the real ones back before they burst like water balloons, and Cameron spun her trident once. Kiba and Akamaru shook off the water on them as Naruto looked down at them. She has good control over water, Naruto muttered as he looked at his Jinchuriki. Yay, Yugito said as she watched the match closely. From what Matabi tells me, Isobu, the Sanbi, give his Jinchuriki the ability to control and make Kurel, a strong water affinity and a Genjutsu mist, she added as everyone looked amazed. Not going to move, Kiba growled at her. Well then, let's go, Akamau, he called out at Akamaru and jumped on his back. Kiba, don't let your ego get the better of you, Kurenai thought as Hana approached them. Kurenai smiled before she looked down at her student. Jujin Bunshin, Kiba called out as Akamaru turned into a clone of Kiba while still on his back. Supinaru Samakogo, Cameron called out as she formed water beneath her that turned into a drill-like vortex that shot at Kiba and Akamaru. Hana turned to Kurenai before she started to shake her head. I don't think that Kiba's going to win, she said as Kurenai nodded. After hearing Cameron's voice, Kakashi narrowed his lone eye as he looked at her. Who is she? He thought as he looked over at her. Diana switched back to Artemis and then looked down at the battlefield as she heard the voice before her eyes widened slightly. As that, she asked herself. Seeing that he was constantly getting pushed back, Kiba looked over to Akamau, and then they both jumped into the air and started spinning at high speed before they made their way to Cameron. She jumped in the air, and seeing that one of them was coming, she formed a shell on her back. The drilling cyclone bounced off the shell as Cameron held out her trident and pointed it at the oncoming cyclone. Boratekusu Kurashu, she called out as water burst out of the trident and shot at the cyclone and not only pushed it back but forced it to stop spinning. But she forgot about the other as it hit her in the side, which sent her flying to the ground on her back, her jacket around her mouth cut. Shit, I got overconfident, she swore in her head. Well, you did spend 13 years in a coma, her Biju told her as she stood up, and I had half my power in somebody else, so I could not heal you fully until I fully returned to you, he added as Cameron nodded. Both vortexes go by the name Kiba and Akamaru, around and head back to her. Cameron held up her trident before she slammed it into the ground. as water burst out from under her before she started to go through a ton of seals. She then ended up on the bird shield as the water started moving, rising and taking shape like a serpentine dragon. Sweden. Suiryuden no Jutsu. Cameron called out as she sent the water dragon at the cyclones, and it pushed them back. Kiba and Akamau, who were still transformed and looked like Kiba, stopped their cyclones as they looked at Cameron, and found that she was running at them, leaving her trident in the ground as she formed the shell on her back once more and a single long armored tail before she jumped into the air and then curled up into a ball and started to roll at Kiba at high speed. With Cameron on the attack this time and Kiba jumping around to try to dodge the attacks soon, he was hit in the chest by the rolling Kirikunoichi. The people on the observation decks were watching in amazement as both Hana and Naruto gained a look in their eyes. "What you thinking?" Sakura asked Naruto. "Well, I was thinking about making something like that but a me version," Naruto said as he started to go over plans about how he could do it. "What would you call it?" Artemis asked her son as Naruto turned to her. "Is it going to be a taijutsu or a normal ninjutsu?" she asked as Naruto closed his eyes as he started to think. Before they could speak more, the ball named Cameron jumped in the air, stopped rolling and formed a seal familiar to Team 7. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," she called out as two clones formed next to her, and then all three of them turned into balls and made their way to Kiba. "Now that is just not fair," Choji said as he looked down at the battlefield. "Not only does she have a jutsu that is like my clan, but she has a better version," he whined as Asuma laughed at his student. "That is life, Choji," Shikamaru said as she turned her head at the laugh that escaped Naruto's mouth. "Shut up, you bastard," she hissed at him. Kiba and Akamaru were soon running out of steam, and it showed as more quickly Kiba moved out of the way of one of the rolling women. Another hit him in the side, and then he knew that it was over as one of the clones hit him in the chest and steamrolled over him. Soon followed by another, then another before, more quickly, a large cloud of dust formed. Everyone waited to see what had happened to Kiba and Akamaru, and when the smoke had cleared, it showed that both of them were knocked out as the three Camerons uncurled and stood up. Hayate walked over to Kiba and checked on him before he raised his hand. "Winner, Cameron Yuminohara," he called out as Cameron's clones popped out as she walked over to her trident and picked it up before stopping and then walking over to Kiba. Hayate got ready to attack but said, "I know medical ninjutsu," as Hayate let her pass. She knelt by the downed Kiba and held her hands over him as they started to glow green, and she began healing him. "Now that is just strange," B said for once, not rapping as Naruto and Yugito nodded. "What is?" Kakashi asked him. "She's a Jinchuriki, and she can perform medical ninjutsu," Artemis said, equally shocked as the Jinchuriki. Cameron then stood up and looked at the Hokage, who looked her in the eye before nodding slightly before she walked back to her team as the next two names were picked. Suigetsu Hazuka vs Han of Iowa. Han walked down as Cameron passed her teammate on the up. Suigetsu is a lean-built young man of average height with straight white hair, a light blue tint, and almond-shaped purple eyes. He has pointed teeth, one of which sticks out even when his mouth is closed. He wore a purple, sleeveless shirt with blue pants, sandals and a belt around his waist with water bottles attached to it, and he also wore another belt strapped to his chest, which he used to carry a sword that had all members of Team 7 looking amazed and shocked. Naruto blinked before turning to Sakura. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Naruto asked her as she nodded. "Zabuza's blade?" Naruto asked as the Kiri ninja looked over to them. "You knew Zabuza-sama?" Chojuro asked as he walked over to them, and Team 7 nodded. "Can you tell me how he died and why Kubikiribocho was in the ground with his body?" he asked as the Kiri-sensei nodded as Hayate started the next match. "Well, he was hired by Gato, who was trying to take over the wave," Sakura started as Naruto nodded. My team was sent there on the pretense of a C rank mission, but when we met Zabuza, it was bumped up to an A- rank. Kakashi added as the Kiri ninja nodded as Suigetsu held his hands out on finger pistols and started to shoot water bullets at Han. We fought him and his apprentice twice, with the second time leading to the apprentice's death first before Gato, turning on Zabuza, and then Zabuza killed him. But the wounds that gained killed him, Naruto said as the swordsman nodded. As for the sword in the ground, we were using it as a grave marker, he added at Sakura and Kakashi's nod. I see, the sensei said as he took a breath in before he sighed. Thank you for telling me. I'll inform the Mizukage about this so that she knows what happened, he said as Kakashi nodded before stopping. Sorry, did you say she? Kakashi asked as Artemis also turned to him. Don't you mean he, as the young dame Mizukage, is in charge, Kakashi added as the man nodded. Did you not know that our tyrant of a cage was killed and replaced? He asked the Konoha nin, who turned to the Hokage. Along with most other villages, they did not know a new Mizukage existed. I did say the current Mizukage has the ability of Haoshoku Haki, Hiruzen said with a smile. Oh, Guy said as he looked at the Kiri-sensei. Anyway, I'll inform her, and so you will have the reward for the information, he said as he turned back to the field to see that Suigetsu had trapped Han in a large ball of water. And just like that, Suigetsu has lost, he said as Kamaran nodded as Chojuro looked confused. What do you mean, Utakata-sensei? He asked. The Gobi has the power over boil release, the now named Utakata said as Chojuro's eyes shot wide. If Suigetsu stuck to Kenjutsu, he would have had a chance of winning, but now, the Jinchuriki said, shaking his head. And to prove his point, Han started to let out chakra as the water around him began to bubble. What the? Suigetsu said as he felt the water heat up until steam began to come off the ball of water. Suigetsu said as he let the square of a water drop as he held his hands before Han zoomed in on him with red chakra around his fists. Be punched the Kiri nin, and all Suigetsu could do was take each punch. And before Suigetsu knew it, he was knocked out. He is not going to like that, Kamaran said as Utakata nodded, and Hayate called the match and named Han the winner as Han walked back to his team. The 8 remaining people looked around as they waited for the next 2 names to be picked. Naruto had a small laugh, so Kakashi turned to him. What is it? He asked him. 3 of the remaining 8 are Jinchuriki, Naruto said as the Konoha Jonin looked around and found that Naruto was right as Naruto and Yugito hadn't gone yet or the Suna Jinchuriki. Kakashi looked at the board before saying, make that 2, he said before looking down at Naruto. You're up, he told him as Naruto looked over and saw that Kakashi was right. But what shocked him was that it showed his full name. Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki vs Kuretsuchi of Iowa. Kuretsuchi looked shocked. Then Mutaris as she looked at Naruto as he jumped down. Kuretsuchi, Roshi said as she turned to him. Your grandfather does not want his blood or attack Konoha, so do not do anything rash, he told her as she also jumped down. They met in the middle as people looked shocked by Naruto's middle name, but then they saw that Kuretsuchi glared at Naruto. And Naruto was doing the same to her. I'm going to destroy you for what your father did to my village, Kuretsuchi growled at him. Then I'll do the same in the name of my clan's men, Naruto growled back. Hayate looked back at Hiruzen as Artemis sighed. Why does he have to be more like me than Minato? She asked aloud. Hiruzen nodded, so Hayate turned back to the battle to see both of them were ready to fight. He raised his hand and then brought it down. Begin, he called out. The 2 ran at each other with a fist cocked back, with Kuretsuchi's fist becoming stone and growing slightly while Naruto's fist was glowing golden orange. And then the fists met, but with the power that both of them were using, they were both pushed back before Kuretsuchi went thou the snake, ran, and bird seals before the ground turned into spikes around Naruto, who grabbed the Yoto and took a swipe with it, sending out a thin blade of wind. And like in the forest, Tenten did not see a blade of wind. She saw a hawk flying through the rock spikes and heading for Kuretsuchi. Naruto's right fist moved out a small bit as rockets appeared out of his arm before he raised said arm and fired all the missiles at Kuretsuchi. The missiles crashed around in the air before and then flew to where Kuretsuchi was, but a large dome of earth formed beneath her, shielding her from the explosions and the wind blade coming at her. The dome crumbled to the ground to find that Kuretsuchi was no longer there. Naruto cursed under his breath as he held his hands out. Shinra Tensei, Naruto called out as he sent out an invisible blast of chakra from around him. It hit Kuretsuchi, who was invisible, as Naruto turned to her. Naruto then appeared in front of Kuretsuchi. With his sword raised high, Kuretsuchi pulled out a kunai, and another kunai versus sword match happened. Artemis saw Kakashi look at the spot where Naruto once was before she looked back to see Naruto and Kuretsuchi fighting. "You've worked out his technique?" she asked as he nodded to her. "He can change places with something within visual range, right?" he asked her as she held her hand out and rocked it side to side as if to say yes and no. But before she could say any more, Naruto formed another hand and went through seals before placing a finger on Kuretsuchi's shoulder. "Raiden, Byakurai," he called out as a blast of lightning shot out of his finger and through Kunoichi's shoulder. But she did not take the hit, lying down as she kicked straight up, her left leg hitting Naruto in the chin. But the two kept the sword and kunai in place as people watched the battle. "They're even," Han said to Roshi as the older Jinchuriki nodded. "It's a battle to see whose ideals are stronger and who has the bigger resolve," Baki told his students as Kuretsuchi pulled out a second kunai as Naruto stuck with the Yoto. "So you must not take your eyes off the battle at any moment," Asuma said to his three students, Ino, who had woken up to see the fight. As such, each sensei had told each student to watch who had the bigger resolve. "Avenged hundreds of Iwa ninja," or "avenge hundreds of Uzumaki." No one could take their eyes off the fight as Naruto and Kurodachi cut each other up, but they did not care. In a twist of the fight, they both managed to disarm the other as Kuretsuchi's kunai flew into a wall that they became embedded in, while the Yoto did the same but to the other side of them. Both of them jumped away from each other but not before launching a jutsu at the other. "Yoten, Sekaidio no Jutsu Kaden, Gokakyu no Jutsu," they called out. Kuretsuchi spat out a glob of quicklime as Naruto breathed a large fireball. Flames and quicklime met each other and became hardened rock as they fell to the floor. Naruto narrowed his eyes. "This is getting me nowhere," he thought before he held out a hand. "Bansho Tenin," he called out as Karachi was pulled off her feet and was heading straight for Naruto at an alarming rate uncontrollably. Naruto raised his leg and made sure to aim for her neck and called out, "Ryu no Kyubi," and slammed Kuretsuchi into the ground so hard that the ground beneath her cracked on impact. Naruto looked down at Kuretsuchi, pulling his fist back and then shooting it forward into Kunoichi and going further into the ground, and all the air from her lungs was taken out. Kuretsuchi looked dazed as Naruto opened his hand, as Yoto jumped out of the ground from where it had been invaded and spun through the air into Naruto's waiting hand. She looked up at him and felt fear as he looked down at her. She saw a beast ready to kill her and send her to the Shinigami. "Do it," she said as she looked at Naruto, who just looked at her. "Come on, you monster, be like your clan of bloodthirsty warriors and take my life," she said as she slowly pickets herself off the floor. "No," Naruto said as he turned around and started walking away before stopping and then looking up to his mother, who smiled and nodded before he looked back at her. "I won this battle, and unlike Iwa, I don't take innocent life," Naruto told her as the Konoha ninja smiled as he continued walking away as Kuretsuchi looked at him before she fell back knocked out. As he walked off, He saw his mother looking at him as steam came off his body, and he rejoined his team as they saw that all his injuries had healed up. Hinata looked at him, seeing that he was all healed up, and put the pot she was holding away in her pouches. Kurenai smiled down at her. Maybe next time, she told her student. Artemis looked at her son with a smile as the medial ninja took Kurosuchi away. I'm proud of you, and I have no doubt that your father and grandfather would as well, she told him as Naruto gained a small smile. But he could not help himself. Which grandfather? He asked her. Your Uzumaki grandfather, she said right back with a motherly smile. Before they could talk more, the next two names were picked. Hinata Hyuga vs Neji Hyuga. Hinata is a slender girl of fair complexion who, as a Hyuga, her most distinguishing trait is the Byakugan, giving her featureless lavender eyes. She has dark blue hair that she keeps in a home-cut hair that is cut just above her forehead akin to a bowl cut with chin-length strands framing her face. Hinata wore a cream-colored hooded jacket with a fire symbol on the upper sleeves and fur around the cuffs and hem with navy blue pants and kept her hitai loosely around her neck. Hinata met Neji in the middle of the area with Hayate standing between them. Hello ne Neji ni, Hinata said to him timidly. Naruto asked as he was hit over the head by his mother as he looked down. Don't curse around your mother, Artemis told him. Did Hinata ever say she had a bother? Ino asked Sakura, who shook her head. No, from what Neji told me, Hinata is the heiress of the Hyuga clan, and he is her cousin, Lee told them as they looked at him. Hinata-sama, I must ask you too. Neji started speaking before the voice of Kiba called out. Hinata fight, he said as everyone turned to him to see that he was getting held back by doctors. Show him who you are, Kiba said before his sister dragged him off as Artemis looked at her with a smile. Like brother, like sister, Hana heard in her head as she saw Artemis with a large smile. Hana said nothing before she went after her brother. Both Hyugas started activating their Byakugan as they both took a stance. The same stance. Begin, Hayate called out as Hyuga ran at each other with great speed and started hitting small points in the body. No one said a word as the cousins found fast as only a few could keep up with their eyes. What are they doing? Ino asked as she watched the fight. They're not hitting each other, Shikamaru added as she looked down at the fight. Wrong, Naruto said as they looked at him. They're hitting the tenketsu, he told them, his eyes not leaving the battle. Those around him saw his eyes moving quickly as he saw every hit aimed at both Hyuga. And it's not looking good for Hinata, Naruto said as everyone looked at him. Neji is aiming to shut down her arms while Hinata is going to the main points where chakra forms, the blonde Uzumaki said as people saw both Artemis and Kakashi nod. All she needs to do is hit the right spot, and she can finish this match, Artemis said as Hinata started to push Neji back. But that was what he wanted. Neji went forward with a double strike, one aimed at Hinata's heart and the other at the upper part of Hinata's arm. Naruto closed his eyes as those around him looked at him before they realized what had happened. Neji had won. The strike that hit Hinata's heart made her cough up blood that fell onto her jacket as her eyes shot wide. And so Neji started to go harder in his assault on her as each it was harder and faster than the last until Hinata fell to the floor and Neji began to walk away before a gasp was heard through the room. Neji stopped and turned around to see that Hinata was back on her feet. Why do you get back up? You're a failure to our clan, he told her, but she did not hear his words as she looked at him. You fight for nothing but hope when you have been fated to lose to me, Neji added. But once more, the words did not go through to her as she looked at him. That is where you are wrong, Hinata said as she struggled to stay standing. You are the one who is fighting for the hope that you can break the chains of the caged bird, Hinata said as Neji's face became murderous. And you said that I was fated to lose, but you are currently fighting fate yourself as you try to kill me. But we are no different, she told him as Neji laughed himself at her with a strike right at her heart. But the sensei and Hayate stopped him with Kakashi holding one arm while Kurenai was holding the other arm. Guy hooked his arm around Neji's neck as Hayate stood just in front of Neji with his sword. "Yuan, walk away," Kakashi said as Hinata collapsed to the floor coughing up blood. The care for the main branch is shown once more. Neji scoffed as Guy tightened his hold on his student. Naruto appeared next to her as his chakra chains shot out of him and into Hinata, and steam started to come off Hinata. "Someone get a medic here now," Naruto called out as he allowed Hinata his healing ability. But it was working slowly. Neji was dragged back to the observation area as a medic came over and started to heal Hinata along with Naruto and Kamaran jumping down as well as the three of them worked on healing as they downed Kunoichi. "I must have a word with them," Hiruzen said as he watched with bated breath at the healing before Naruto retracted his chains with a sigh. The medic nodded in thanks as he rushed Hinata away, and Naruto took both him and Kamaran back up to the observation area. "She's going to live," Naruto said as people around him sighed as people made sure that Neji was nowhere near them in case Shino or Kurenai were to try and kill him. But before they could do anything, the next two names were picked. Gaara of the Sand versus Rock Lee. The Ikibi Jinchuriki appeared in a small cyclone of sand as Lee jumped down to join Gaara at the bottom, but the Suna team and the other Jinchuriki were on the edge as they looked down at the crazy sand user. With the Jinchuriki ready to jump down if Gaara started to let his beast out. "Naruto-san, may I ask why you are like this?" Guy asked him as Naruto looked out of the corner of his eye. "Gaara is what happens when a Jinchuriki goes off the deep end and lives in the darkness," Naruto said as Guy's eyes shot wide. Lee heard what Naruto had said as he looked at Gaara before narrowing his eyes as he grabbed the cork from the gourd that was shot his way. "Please don't rush things," Lee said to Gaara. Hayate smiled slightly at Lee before raising his hand. "May the 18th match begin," Hayate called out. At that, Lee jumped forward with a kick, but sand rose around Gaara, defending him. So Lee moved in fast with another kick but had the same result as Naruto looked on. "How is he controlling the sand?" Sakura asked as Naruto, who was still watching the match, explained. "It's his Jinchuriki ability," Naruto told her as she looked at him. "As you know, each Jinchuriki have an ability. I can sense negative emotions. As we've seen with Han, he can use boil release," Naruto said as Sakura nodded along. "I can make all fire release jutsu stronger. And when I do, the fire turns blue. B-sensei can make ink," Yugito added as Sakura nodded. "I have a strong water release and can make coral, while Utakata-sensei can make acid," Kamaran added as Sakura took the information in. "I can use bug jutsu. And if I remember right, the Yanbi had a strong lava release," Fu added as she walked over. "So does Lee have a chance?" Sakura asked Jinchuriki. But all she got was silence. And what shocked people more was that Han and Roshi appeared with the other Jinchuriki. "Thank you, Uzumaki-san," Roshi said to Naruto as Naruto looked at him with a raised brow as Lee moved out of the way of a tendril of sand. "What for?" Naruto asked him as he returned his gaze to the match as the 8 Jinchuriki stood together. "Thank you for sparing my student when you had all the right to," slitting her thought, Roshi said as everyone looked at him. "When Musama ordered the attack on Uzu, my older brother and I was the current Tsuchikage Onoki tried to persuade him to not and ask them to step out of the war," Roshi said as Artemis looked at him. Still, he looked down, but Musama was persuasive, "and I regret with my brother what Iwa had done to Uzu," Roshi told him as he pulled out a scroll and handed it to Naruto. Naruto looked at the scroll before looking at his mother, who nodded, so Naruto accepted the scroll. "Thank you for your truthful words," Naruto said as he turned back to the match to see that Lee was kneeling on the statue. "Lee, take them off," Guy shouted as everyone looked confused as they saw Lee look over to Guy. "But Guy-sensei, You said never to do that unless I was defending lives precious to me. Lee asked him, but Guy smiled at him, and Naruto swore he saw a sun behind the man. Lee laughed as he rolled down his leg warmers to show that he had weights on. Leg weights, Naruto thought. Oh, that's good, I can move freely now, Lee said as he held onto the weights. Before dropping them, there's no way that a few weights will let you keep up with Gaara's sand, Temari thought, but that was soon replaced by a shocked look once the weights landed, making a loud bang, and the weights left creators in the ground. Artemis said as his eye twitched as she looked at the weights. Why does he have an elephant's worth of weight on each leg? She asked him as the other genin's eyes shot wide. Guy laughed at that, seemingly forgetting that Artemis was a goddess for a second. Now go, Lee, Guy told his student. Yes, sir, Lee called out before disappearing and reappearing behind Gaara. The sand just managed to catch a punch heading to Gaara, along with 2 more punches and a kick, before Lee disappeared again and delivered an axe kick. And the kick landed. Lee, like me, picked up a rare chara disease that messes with us so that we have a small amount of chakra, and my father did not have the money to pay for my operation, and as Tsunade-sama is not here anymore, Lee could not have it either, Guy said as Artemis and a few other nodded. So I trained Lee purely on taijutsu, he informed the goddess. I see, so the weights, Artemis asked him. Gaara looked up at Lee, showing he now had a cut on his cheek from Lee's sandal. As per Lee's request, I triple the weights each time he gets accustomed to them, Guy told her as she nodded. He then turned to Lee. Now, Lee shows the power of youth, Guy called out as he crouched down. Yes, sir, Lee called out again as he rocketed at Gaara. Lee then disappeared and reappeared behind Gaara once more, and as the sand user turned to face him, Lee was not there. He was in front of Gaara once more, and he delivered a strong punch that took Gaara off his feet and a few feet back before the sand attacked Lee, but the boy moved out of the way, but a sound filled the room. It sounded like something cracking as things started to fall off Gaara. This is bad, Konkuro said as Temari and Baki nodded. It was Gaara's face that was cracking. Or, to be more accurate, it was a layer over Gaara's face made out of a sand-like armor that was cracking and falling to the floor and showed that Gaara had a deranged smile on his face. The Jinchuriki was getting ready to jump down with Yugito's nails becoming claws. Kamaran holding her trident. Rochi's skin started to head up along with Hanzamur. Utakata had pulled out a blowpipe. Fu had formed her wings, B taking hold of one of his swords and Naruto as the points of his chains sticking out of his body. The sand rose once more, but this time over Gaara, and started to fix the Amur. It also covered up the deranged smile like it was never there in the first place. Is that all? Gaara asked Lee, who looked shocked then saw that Guy had nodded at him. Hence, he started to undo the bandages that covered his arms. Guy, please tell me that you did not teach this boy the. Artemis asked him, but Guy nodded. I did, and with Lee having no one, I took him in and did what my father did, Guy told her as Artemis closed her eyes before looking at him. Does he know the risks? She asked him as Guy nodded, and he has accepted them, Artemis asked as Guy nodded again. Come on, hurry up, Gaara told Lee, who glared and was running around Gaara at high speed. As you wish, Lee said as he landed a kick to Gaara's chin sending him into the air. That's not all, Lee called out as he repeatedly kicked Gaara into the air higher and higher away from Gaara's sand. Genin, Artemis called out as they all turned to her. Watch, and you shall see the pinnacle of taijutsu and know that even if Gaara somehow services this attack, he would not come out of this uninjured as this is one of the strongest taijutsu, she told them as they all looked back to the match as Guy closed his eyes in prayer. I can't take my eyes off him even if I'm hurt, Lee thought as he winched, but he fought to keep his eyes open. Soon he was behind Gaara with the bandages wrapped around Jinchuriki before he tightened them. and then Lee started to spin them at a great speed as they headed for the ground. Omit Renge, Lee called out as they both hit the ground before Lee jumped out of the way as Gaara lay on the floor with cracks forming over his body. But he was slowly getting up. But the armor fell off him, showing everyone that Gaara was covered with small cuts from the stones on the ground, and Lee was winching. "What's the matter with Lee?" Sakura asked. "It's the Omit Renge kid," Roshi said as she turned to him and found that the Jinchuriki had arranged themselves according to the number of tails they held, with Naruto standing next to her. "It's a strong taijutsu technique," Utakata added as she turned to him. "But it's a double-edged sword for the user as it puts a lot of strain on the body with how fast they move," B explained to her, again not rapping just to tell Sakura how serious this was. "As of right now, Lee is just a mass of pain and weakness," Kurenai said as Sakura turned to the red-eyed woman. "But that is slightly fortunate that even if Gaara is a Jinchuriki, he's in the same boat as Lee," Asuma finished off as his three students turned to him. "So what's going to happen now?" Ino asked as she looked down at Lee before she saw Lee gain a smile along with Guy. "Why is he smiling?" Neji asked as he looked down at the field. "He's going to lose," he added, but Guy laughed. "He's about to push Gaara back soon," Guy said as everyone turned to him. Kakashi's visible eye widened as the conversation between Guy and Artemis went through his head. "The lotus of Konoha will bloom a second time," he told them as Lee crossed his arm in front of his face, and Gaara looked confused. "Guy, you taught him the 8 gates," Kakashi shouted at Guy as Kurenai and Asuma's eyes shot wide and looked at Guy with equal shock. "Yes, that's right," Guy said as people looked shocked and confused. "He has the talent," Guy said, but Asuma cut him off. "It does not matter if he has a talent for it. You taught him something horribly dangerous and forbidden," Asuma said as people turned to him. "The Ura Renge is something that should not be taught. It's at the top of the list. In fact," he added as Kakashi and Kurenai nodded. "This I know, but I would not teach it to him if he did not have the skill for it," Guy said as he looked down at Lee. "And so no matter what you all say, I know that I did the right thing for my student as Lee has the same drive I do, and the same self-rule," Guy said as Kakashi and the Konoha sensei looked away from the man. "How many gates can he open?" Kakashi asked him as Kuno looked down. "What are the 8 gates?" she asked Naruto, who looked at her. "He can go to Tomen," Guy said as Utakata turned to Chojuro. "Chojuro, watch closely as this fight is going to show how the Kiri no Shinobugatana Shichinin Shu lost to one man," he told his student, who nodded and waited with bated breath. "What are you talking about? What are the 8 gates?" Sakura asked them. "The 8 gates are a set of limiters set on the body," Kurenai said as she looked down at Lee as chakra started to form around him. "And in order to perform the Ura Renge, you must release the first 3 of the limiters," Asuma added as rocks started to float around Lee. "Remove the limiters," both Sakura and Kuno asked them. "There are 8 points in the body that are called gates that are on the chakra network that is called Kaiman the gate of opening, Human the gate of rest, Simon the gate of life, Shoman the gate of pain, Toman the gate of closing, Kaiman the gate of joy, Kyoman the gate of shock and Shimon the gate of death," Kakashi said as he showed his Sharingan. "These gates limit the amount of chakra flowing through the body, and by opening the gates, the user can draw power 10 times what they normally can do even if the body is destroyed afterwards," Roshi added. "When the user uses Omit Renge, the first gate is opened," Guy told Sakura, and unknowingly Kuno, "and to start performing the Ura Renge, he will need to open the 3rd gate, and at this moment, he has the 2nd gate open as well," Guy told her as she looked down at Lee. "But with how Lee is at the moment shows how much of a double-edged sword this technique is," Kakashi said as he looked at Sakura. "The state and technique where all 8 gates have been opened is called Hachiman Tonko no Jin, and anyone who uses that technique will, no matter how brief, active power that surpasses the power of the 5 Kage, Kakashi told her as she looked shocked. No one said anything as Naruto turned to him. As more chakra started to form around Lee. What's the downside? He asked. They'll die from power overload as that moment literally meets the power of the gods, and it burns them up, Artemis said as Guy sighed. Naruto, you have helped me, and you are like me and yet you have beaten fate, so know this, that if I do fall, I will make sure that you can help him. Lee thought as a picture of him and Naruto laughing in his mind formed. As steam started to come off his skin. Guy-sensei watch as I develop my nindo, Lee said in his mind as he flung both arms out as his skin turned red. Simon the gate of life, release, Lee called out as Gaara looked shocked at Lee. Even if I fall here, I will aid others in taking you down. Shoman the gate of pain release, Lee called out as he released more power from him, but blood started to fall from his nose. He then once more rocketed at Gaara, but this time he was faster, and when he moved, he destroyed the ground beneath him. No one bar the goddess could track him as Lee kicked Gaara in the chin and sent Gaara into the air. As the sand came up to defend him, Lee wanted none of that as he zoomed around, punching and kicking Gaara all over the place in the air. Toman the gate of closing, release, Lee called out as he zoomed in on Gaara once more as Neji looked at Lee. You are no longer my rival, Neji, as I have found someone better for me to fight, so watch as I was going to use this on you, Lee thought. Lee delivered a punch to Gaara's chest that sent Gaara crashing to the ground, but the Jinchuriki failed to notice that Lee had wrapped bandages around his waist. Lee then pulled the banger up to him as Gaara was dragged along. The sand can't keep up, Tamari thought as she saw Gaara helpless in the air. This is not good, she added. Lee could feel his consciousness slipping as he got ready to deliver his last attack. I'm sorry that I could not fight you in the finals, Naruto, but if you face Gaara, I will make sure that not even the Ikibi will heal this attack, Lee thought as he moved a leg by his fist that held the bandage, and as Gaara moved higher Lee punched and kicked him at the same time. Ura Renge, Lee called out before he fell unconscious in the air. Gaara landed on the ground, but his gourd turned to sand as it cushioned his fall. Gaara looked up at the unconscious Lee in the air as his eyes changed from green to yellow irides and pupils, each taking the shape of a black 4-pointed star with 4 black dots around it. He slowly got up and held his hand out, but before he could do anything to Lee, the Jinchuriki jumped in. Yugito had long claws covered in blue flames pointed at the back of Gaara's neck as her eyes were not her normal color. Her right eye was yellow, and the left was green. Cameron had her trident pointed at Gaara's chest as it trickled with water, and her eyes were now red with yellow pupils. Roshi and Han had locked their legs around Gaara's to stop him from moving, with Roshi's leg covered in lava and Han's armor giving off steam. And like the others, their eyes had also changed, with Roshi's eyes having yellow irides and white pupils and Han's turning to dark blue-green. Utakata had put Lee in a bubble that held the unconscious boy, and his eyes were completely black. Fu was in the air with orange-red eyes as she looked down at Gaara with a jutsu ready to defend Lee. While no one could see B's eyes, they saw he had a sword to Gaara's neck. And Naruto had his golden gains out as his rippled eyes were now red with a slit. No one said a word as Gaara looked at his siblings of burden as they were all ready to take him out, and something told him that he must stand down. And for once, he listened to it. But he could not help but ask, "Why are you helping him?" Gaara asked them as they saw he did not know what they were doing. Bloodshed is unnecessary on this day, Yugito said as Gaara looked at her. This day is to see if we can show the power that we hold, Cameron added as Gaara turned his head to her. For villages to come and be won, Roshi said as Gaara looked at him. And for us to put aside grievances, Han piped up as Gaara turned to him. But do not mistake us, brother, Utakata told him as the bubble that held Lee floated over Guy as Gaara looked at Utakata. Fu then flew closer to the ground. If you decide to take his life, she said as she formed a seal. Then, as the only interloper in Konoha, B told him as lighting started to form over his sword. We will take you from my fox den and make sure that you do not see the light of day for a while. Naruto finished as all the ninja did not see the Jinchuriki. No, they saw the Biju. Gaara looked at them for a while before his eyes turned to normal. Never mind, he said as the sand beneath them turned back into his gourd. Winner Gaara of the desert, Hayate called out as Gaara started to walk away. Gaara's team looked at the Jinchuriki. Are they? Kankuro asked as Baki nodded. Yes, he said as both his students looked at him. And the Kyuubi Jinchuriki is the one that found out that Gaara was here, Baki said as both students looked shocked. All the Jinchuriki bar Yugito was left as Hayate looked at her. It's only me and that boy up there that are left. She told him to prove her right. The board had the names. Choji Akamaiki vs Yugito ni. Choji met Yugito at the bottom as Omoi looked at his teammates and found that Karui was looking at Choji. He looks cute, she thought as she looked at him. May the final match of the preliminary matches begin. Hayate called out as he jumped back. Choji made a seal similar to the bird seal as his body got bigger. Go, Choji, roller her over, Ino yelled out. Yugito crouched down as her body gained blue flames over it. Are you going to be my cat toy? Yugito asked him as Choji started rolling at her. Nikuden Sensha, Choji called out as he rolled at Yugito. But the Jinchuriki jumped over the ball by the name of Choji and rolled into a wall. And got stuck. Choji thought as he tried to roll out of the wall, but Yugito descended on him, shrouded in blue flames, and her fist cocked back. Juakin, Yugito called out as she sent a blast out of her fist in the form of a lion's head that rammed into Choji, and when Yugito cut her attack off, everyone found Choji knocked out. I think you went overboard there, kitten, Yugito heard Matabi in her headset as she looked at her opponent. Winter Yugito ni, Hayate called out. Medics took Choji away. May all the 17 finalists come down here, Hiruzen called out. The others walked down to meet Yugito at the bottom as Anko walked out with a box with a hole in it. The next stage of the Chūnin exams will start in 2.5 months. But as of right now, we need to know who you are going to be fighting, Hiruzen said as Anko started to walk around. Now I would like for people who fought to come and pull out a number, he informed them as Anko walked over to Kakashi who was pulling for Sasuke. Sasuke has the number 2. Kakashi said as he pulled out a ball with the number 2 on it. Anko walked over to Fu. I got 9, she said as someone wrote down the names. I have 3, Shino said after he pulled out his ball. Samui was the next person, and she called out, 5. Sakura was next and then saw the number before saying, 9, as Fu smiled at her. I got 4. Shikamaru said as she yawned. Kankuro was next before saying, 3. After him was Tenten, who pulled out the number 8 before Chojuro pulled out his. 6, he said as someone nodded. Shizuka was next, and she pulled out. 7, she called out. Gurren pulled out hers and called. 8, before she and Tenten locked eyes. 4. Tamari said as Shikamaru looked at her before swearing under her breath. Kamaran was the next one who looked over to Shizuka. It seems that we will fight, she said as she showed the ball to Shizuka, which showed the number 7. As Anko walked away, it seems your old number is back, the Three Tails said to her. Yay, Kamaran said back. I got 6, Han said as Chojuro looked at his armor. Naruto pulled his ball and laughed. Number 1 already, Naruto said. Neji was the next one, and he pulled out the number 1 ball as well. He could feel eyes on him as a dark smile formed on Naruto aimed at him along with the fox on Naruto's shoulder. Gaara then pulled out the number 2, and Yugito looked at Samui and held the number 5. So the matches of the next round of the Chūnin exams are the following. Hayate called out as everyone turned to him. Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki vs Neji Hyuga. Sasuke Uchiha vs Gaara of the Desert. Shino Aburame vs Kankuro of Suna. Shikamaru Nara vs Tamari of Suna. Yugito Ni vs Samui of Kumo. Han of Iwa vs Chojuro of Kiri. Kamaran Yumi Nohara vs Shizuka of Nadeshiko Village. Tenten of Konoha vs Guren of Kusa, and finally Sakura Haruno vs Fu of Taki. Hayate finished as he took a breath. You will meet in the Konoha arena in 2.5 months. Hiruzen said as everyone nodded. Now then, go off and train and bring honor to your homes, he told them as the sensei started to lead the genin out. World of the Gods, United States of America, New York, Montauk, Northeastern Long Island, Camp Halfblood, the Big House. Centaur walked through a red-painted house and went up to the attic. The centaur was a middle-aged man from the waist up, with thinning brown hair, bushy eyebrows, intense brown eyes and a scruffy beard, with his lower half as a white stallion. He wore a white dress shirt with a red and gold striped tie, a black jumper, and a frayed tweed jacket. He entered the attack, walked over to a mummified woman, and looked at her with a heavy heart. What is to happen next? He asked the mummy. The mummy came to life as it spewed out green mist from its mouth and took the shape of 6 people. The first was a 9-year-old girl with mousy brown hair and fire-red eyes. She was dressed in a plain brown dress. Son of the maiden shall arrive, she said before going silent. The second was another woman that looked to be in their early 20s. Had long blonde hair the color of ripe wheat, and wore a bright green dress with a dark cape, which gave her the appearance of fresh plant shoots breaking through fertile earth whenever she moved, and on her head, she wore a crown of woven corn leaves and adornments of poppies. Daughter of lightning returns alive, she told him before going silent. The last of them was a beautiful woman who looked to be just going out of her 20s, with silver hair braided over one shoulder. She wore a dress that shimmered with colors like peacock feathers. Hate for the gods is born, she told him. The next that spoke was a very tall, imposing and very muscular man with albino white skin, intense black eyes and shoulder-length black hair, with bangs usually covering most of his forehead and wearing black flowing robes. The camp will be torn, he told him. The next one looked like Poseidon. A ninja shall lend aid, he told him before the centaur turned to the last one. He was tall, imposing, and very muscular, with shoulder-length black hair and a gray and black neatly trimmed beard with brilliant electrically blue eyes, with a serious and proud, but very handsome face, and his attire was a dark blue pinstriped suit. And the sea's choice has been made, he told him before the people returned to the green smoke as the centaur wrote all of what they said him down. Naruto, Kakashi, Guy and Tenten were in Hiruzen's office along with him as Tenten and Naruto stood in front of their sensei. Thank you both for coming here, Hiruzen said to Naruto and Tenten. Why have we been summoned, Hokage-sama? Tenten asked him. The Hokage looked over to Naruto, who nodded. It has recently come to our attention that during the preliminary matches, we found out something about you, he told the kunoichi in the room, who looked both shocked and amazed. What was it, Hokage-sama? Tenten asked him. Hiruzen looked Tenten dead in the eye. It was something about your mother, he told her as Tenten was listening to him with bated breath. And what I tell you now only a select few know, Hiruzen said as Tenten nodded. Guy put a hand on Tenten's shoulder as he breathed. What about her? Tenten asked as she scoffed, acting like she did not care. But both Naruto and Hiruzen could see past the look on her face. There is a reason why she is not here in Konoha, Hiruzen said as Tenten looked at him. There are laws in place that we mortals have no control over, Naruto said as Tenten looked over to him. Both of us share one thing in common. That is that both our mothers are not mortal, Naruto said as Tenten looked shocked. What? Tenten asked him as she looked over before returning to the Hokage. Naruto speaks the truth, he said with a nod. Naruto's mother was killed right before my eyes before turning into the moonlight and then reappeared during the preliminary matches, he told her as she looked at him. The term that we two go by is a demigod, Naruto said as Tenten turned back to Naruto. That means half god half mortal, he added as Tenten looked at her hand. Who is my mother? Tenten asked him. Naruto sighed at that. Now that is the hard part, he told her as she still looked at her hands. When a god or goddess has a child, they will not be claimed by their parents until either the god or goddess is ready, Naruto said as Tenten looked up. So you can't tell me? Tenten asked as he shook his head. So what am I going to do now? She asked him. From what the talking between our mothers, she is going to claim you as her daughter when we get to camp. Half-blood as mine is going to do for me, Naruto told her as Tenten looked shocked. But my circumstance is slightly different than yours as my mother is both her sides. Don't ask now, I'll tell you later, he explained to her. Hiruzen looked over to Naruto and Tenten before taking out his pipe. How long will you be at this camp? He asked the blonde after taking a puff. The summer, then right back to Konoha, Naruto said as Tenten looked down. I see, then I'll allow it. But I want you both to be safe, Hiruzen said to the both of them as they nodded, with Tenten being shell-shocked. Now then, Guy, Tenten, both of you can leave as I need to talk with Kakashi and Naruto, he told both members of Team 9. Guy nodded and started to lead Tenten out, telling her what he would be teaching her this month. Once the door was closed, Hiruzen looked Kakashi dead in the eye as he pressed a button on his desk. Rose, you can send in the other two now, Hiruzen said before moving a finger away from the button. Soon, Sasuke and Sakura walked in as they approached the main desk to join Naruto and Kakashi. Now, before we start, I will let you know that I'm having Inoichi Yamanaka on his way here to look through your mind so I can find the truth, so I will say here and now I will have it, Hiruzen said as they all nodded. Naruto, Sakura and Kakashi knew what was happening, while Sasuke had no idea what was happening. Kakashi Hatake, what have you taught Genin Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki? Hiruzen asked the one-eyed man. He looked at his leader and knew that he could do nothing as someone who could pull the truth out of him. The hard way was on the way, only the Ki no Bori no Shugyo and teamwork exercises, Kakashi said as Hiruzen nodded. What have you taught Genin Sakura Haruno? Hiruzen asked him. The same as Naruto, Kakashi said. I see, Hiruzen said with narrowed eyes as he drilled his eyes into Kakashi. What have you taught Genin Sasuke Uchiha? Hiruzen asked him. Kakashi said nothing as Hiruzen waited patiently, but Kakashi said nothing. Kakashi Hatake, I asked you a question, the Hokage asked him as Kakashi looked up. So what have you taught Sasuke Uchiha? Hiruzen asked him once more. I have taught him 3 fire release ninjutsu, Kaden, Ruka no Jutsu, Kaden, Ryuan Hoka no Jutsu and Kaden, Hosenka no Jutsu, the Suiten ninjutsu, Suiro no Jutsu, Kakashi said as Hiruzen's anger started to rise. A single earth release ninjutsu, Doden, Mogaragakure no Jutsu, and I have started teaching him how to use his second affinity, Kakashi said as he could sense the anger under the surface of his leader. Anything else? Hiruzen asked him. Well, with his lightning release affinity, I taught him Raiden, Raikyu and Futon, Repusho, then Kinobori no Shugyo and teamwork exercises along with Naruto and Sakura, Kakashi said, but he knew that if he did not say more he would not last long, along with Suiman Hoko no Gyo, Shunshin no Jutsu, Geik no Bori no Gyo and Saranto Kuringu, and that is all that I have taught Sasuke, Kakashi finished. I see, Hiruzen said as he stood up and walked over to the window to look out of it. Can you answer why you had made our forces weaker than they should have been when you gained the 3 of them as your students? Hiruzen asked Kakashi as Sakura looked confused. What do you mean, Hokage-sama? Sakura asked him. He did not turn around, but he did answer her. When your team was formed, Kakashi was supposed to make sure that all three of you were Jonin level before you joined this exam, and at best, two of you are High Genin, and the last one is Chūnin level, Hiruzen said as Kakashi looked down. And that is only thanks to his summons and mother, Hiruzen said as Sasuke looked confused. I don't have a summon, Sasuke said as Hiruzen turned around. Who said I was talking about you? He asked the Uchiha as Sasuke looked over to Naruto. It is Naruto who, thanks to the dragons who managed to teach him. But now then, for the real reason you are here, Hiruzen said as the office door opened as a blond man walked in and he was wearing the normal Konoha Jonin uniform. Thank you for coming, Inoichi, Hiruzen told the man. Naruto and Sakura looked at each other, confused as Kakashi's eyes shot wide. Hokage-sama, is this necessary? Kakashi asked him as Sasuke looked at the man. What do you mean, sensei? He asked. Kakashi looked down at the Uchiha with a dark look. The only reason a Yamanaka is summoned with a team is for one of three reasons, Kakashi said as Naruto narrowed his eyes. The first is for prisoner transfer, Hiruzen said as he looked at Sasuke. The second is to help the team through a death or something along those lines, the Hokage added as Naruto's eyes shot wide as he understood. The third is to pull information out of someone and see if they are truly loyal to Konoha, Naruto said as Hiruzen nodded, and Inoichi nodded as he walked up. That's right, and Hokage-sama has asked me to do this for Team 7, Inoichi said as Naruto stepped to him. You want to go first? He asked the blonde going crimson. Yes, was all Naruto said as Inoichi placed his hand on Naruto's head. Psycho Denshin, Inoichi said as he started to look through Naruto's mind before removing it. He is loyal to Konoha, he said as he moved on to Sakura. He repeated the jutsu on her before looking at Hiruzen. She is loyal as well, he said as Hiruzen as Inoichi walked up to Sasuke and placed his hand on Uchiha's head. When Inoichi removed his hand, those with trained eyes could see something form in Inoichi's eyes as he looked at Hiruzen before saying, he is also loyal, Inoichi said as Sasuke looked confused. But some would hear there was something to his voice. I see, Hiruzen said as he looked at Inoichi. If you could step outside for a moment while I talk a little more with Team 7, he asked the man, who nodded and walked out before the Hokage looked at Kakashi. So Kakashi, who will you train for the 2.5 months? Hiruzen asked him as Kakashi looked at him, and he then looked at Sasuke. I'll train, Kakashi said before Anbu appeared around him with their swords pointed at him. Sasuke Uchiha is currently too powerful for a genin at his level, Hiruzen said as he looked at Sasuke, who looked shocked by what was just said. He will be trained by you so long as he does not learn one of those jutsu, Hiruzen said as Kakashi felt the swords around him. I understood, he asked Kakashi who nodded. Kakashi looked saddened by that. Understood Hokage-sama, he said. And who will teach your other two students? Hiruzen asked him as Kakashi shrugged. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed. Sorry, what was that? Hiruzen growled out. The silver-haired man gulped as he looked at Hiruzen. I mean, I'll have Ebisu teach Sakura while I find someone for Naruto, Kakashi said as Hiruzen kept his narrowed eyes on the man. I see, Kakashi. You and Sasuke may go as I will assign teachers for them as it seems that you are unable to pick someone to do the job, Hiruzen said as he sent Kakashi and Sasuke away as Ikyoichi walked back in but saw Naruto and Sakura but was stopped by Hiruzen. Gigi, I know something was up with Sasuke's loyalty test, Naruto said as Sakura looked at him. Inoichi-san told a lie. He can only say yes or be loyal, Naruto said as Inoichi smiled. You're right, kid, but that is only something I can reveal with Hokage-sama, Inoichi said as Naruto and Sakura nodded. Anyway, I ask you both something. Keep an eye on Sasuke Uchiha, and if you think that he cannot be trusted, you may use lethal force, Hiruzen told them as they nodded before looking at Sakura. Now then, Miss Haruno, I'm going to have Cat here train you, Hiruzen said as the purple-haired Anbu appeared next to him. I'm also going to ask medical Anbu, who is called Panda, so that he can teach you medical ninjutsu, Cat told Sakura, who smiled and nodded. Naruto just looked at her. Now, Naruto, were you going to ask the dragons for training? Hiruzen asked the Uzumaki. Inoichi looked shocked as Naruto nodded. That's right, but I have a feeling that you have a better idea, Naruto said. Hiruzen snapped his fingers as another Anbu appeared next to him. But this one had a tiger mask. I'll have Tiger here, along with my student Jiraiya, teach you, Hiruzen said as Naruto looked shocked at him. Monkey, go and retrieve my student, he told an Anbu with a monkey mask who nodded. Monkey shunshined away to get Hiruzen's student and Naruto's grandfather. Cat left and took Sakura with her as Naruto, Tiger, and Hiruzen waited for Monkey and Hiruzen's student. What will you be teaching me, Tiger-san? Naruto asked the Anbu who was going to teach him. Thanks to the information that Hokage-sama has given me about you, I'm going to teach you how to use wood release and help you get the Kyuubi under control, Tiger said as Naruto looked shocked and amazed. That's good. Then I just need to fight the Kyuubi for his chakra now, Naruto said as Hiruzen looked at Naruto. The dragons had me beat my inner darkness or instead accept my inner self so that I could be able to become a true Jinchuriki, he informed them as Hiruzen nodded. So now all you have to do is fight Kyuubi over control of his chakra, Hiruzen asked as Naruto nodded. I see, then you can have training ground zero, he told Tiger, who nodded. They descended into talking about what other things Naruto was going to be trained on. And as an hour passed, Monkey returned with a man bound in steel wire before Monkey disappeared into the rafters of the office. The bound man was tall with a well-built body, fair skin, and waist length, spiky white hair that he usually tied back into a ponytail, with 2 shoulder-length bangs framing his face. There were red lines under his eyes that extended down his face, going all the way to the bottom along with wrinkles that he had around the corners of his mouth and a wart on the left side of his nose. His attire consisted of a green short shirt, kimono and matching pants, under which he wore mesh armor visible at his wrists and ankles, and he also wore hand guards, a black belt, traditional Japanese wooden sandals, and a red haori with 2 yellow circles on each side. He had a large scroll on his back and wore a horned hitai with the kanji for oil, you. Hiruzen looked down at the bound man as he looked up at the Hokage. Hey sensei, you called for me, the determined man asked as Naruto looked down at the man and dubiously activated his Rinnegan. Jiraiya, I have called you here to teach your godson for the finals of the Chūnin selection exams alongside Tiger, Hiruzen said as Jiraiya looked up to Naruto and his mouth fell open once he saw Naruto's eyes. Yes, Naruto is the Rinnegan, Hiruzen told his student. Jiraiya looked over to the Anbu before looking back at his sensei. I could teach the kid myself and give him the Toad contract, Jiraiya said as Naruto looked at him. I have the dragons, bears, wolves and foxes. I don't have another contract, Naruto said as he looked at the man with contempt. I'm agreeing to be taught by you as Hokage-sama as assigned me. But no, I want nothing to do with you, grandfather, Naruto spat at him. Jiraiya looked shocked by what Naruto said. You know, Jiraiya asked him. That you, my father's father? Yes, Naruto said as Hiruzen's eyes shot wide as he looked at Naruto. Jiraiya is your grandfather? He asked Naruto, who nodded. Who is your grandmother? He wondered as Naruto looked over. Like my mother but a different pantheon, Naruto said as Hiruzen looked amazed. She is from the land where we get our writing from, Naruto added. So she is a goddess as well? Tiger asked as Jiraiya looked shocked this time. What are her domains? Tiger asked him. Her domains are over the rising sun, the royal family of the country that I belong to and of creation, Naruto explained. Jiraiya looked shocked before he gained a smile that he managed to woo, a goddess. Amaterasu Obaa is also the queen and ruler of the Shinto gods, Naruto added as Hiruzen nodded. So then, Jiraiya, here are your orders. Train him and help him gain the strength he needs to beat the Kyuubi, Hiruzen said as Jiraiya looked confused. What do you mean? Jiraiya asked him. I did not agree to do this, he added. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes at his student. Let me tell you something that Naruto's mother told me a few days ago, Hiruzen said as he walked around his desk so that he was in front of his student. She was going to tell her twin brother, the god of medicine and health, to make sure that all our doctors would not be able to save anyone but a select few, Hiruzen said as Naruto turned away as Tiger looked at him. What is it? He asked Naruto. Mom knows about my time in Konoha, and she asked me about the hospital staff, and it took Amaterasu Obaa to stop her from killing every doctor and nurse in the hospital, Naruto said as Hiruzen sighed. Do you see what has happened? Jiraiya, the Hokage said as he looked down at his student, who was getting up off the floor. Yes, Jiraiya said with a nod. Good. I'm going to inform the council of this and pray that they do not do anything to anger two goddesses, Hiruzen said as he looked at his student, who nodded. Jiraiya looked at Tiger and Naruto, then nodded. All right then, let's head off, he told them as they walked out. Inoichi watched them leave before turning to his leader. Kushina was a goddess all along, he asked. Hiruzen nodded as he looked over to the man. From what Naruto told me, she was being punished for what one of her maidens did and angered her father, the king of her pantheon, and the three fates, Hiruzen said as Inoichi nodded. So I'll head off to the council room and wait to see if I can gather what brains I have left from the information that I gained, Inoichi said as he started to walk out but stopped by the door. Sasuke Uchiha betrayed us as he is not really loyal, Inoichi said before walking out. Hiruzen stayed quiet for a little while before he turned to a seat. Being out like this is not like you, old friend, Hiruzen said as one of the Konoha elders appeared in the seat. I wanted to make sure that you got all the information from Hitaki, he said as the Hokage took a puff of his pipe. Hiruzen, we both know that if the gods are watching us, then we need to move carefully, more so than we have been, he told Hiruzen. Yes, but who was the one that told the civilian that Naruto was our Jinchuriki? Hiruzen asked as he looked at the man. I did so that the insects would know that we had a plan in hand. But Kaharu, being who she was, made the boy an easy target, he said as Hiruzen took a puff. I will not lie to you and say that I did as you said and disbanded Root, but now seeing what has happened I have a plan, he said as Hiruzen looked at him. And what is that, Danzo? He asked him. Orochimaru has asked for my help taking you out and killing you with his ninja, Danzo said as Hiruzen nodded. I see, so you thinking of helping him? He asked as Danzo nodded. And what? Hiruzen said as Danzo looked down at his arm. I have done some things that I regret, but I will aid Konoha and you, Danzo said as he looked up with a fire that Hiruzen had not seen in a long time. And when the time comes, I will aid you in the fight against Orochimaru, Danzo told Hiruzen, who chuckled. I see, the Hokage said as he started to stand up along with Danzo. Shall we inform the idiots what has been going on? Hiruzen said as Danzo nodded as both men walked out of the office. Training Ground 0. Jiraiya, Tiger and Naruto walked into a large training ground with a waterfall leading into a lake and a large forest along with valley spikes. As the two men and Naruto looked around, Jiraiya turned to Tiger. So, are we going to be teaching him how to access the Kyuubi's chakra? He asked the Anbu. But Tiger shook his head. There is no need, as Naruto-san's summons had him complete the first stage of that by beating his inner darkness. Tiger told the man before forming the tiger seal as wooden pillars with fu dog heads shot out of the ground as Tiger sat on the ground and gained the symbol of sit on his hand, Zuo. And he needs the key, Jiraiya said as he bit his thumb, went through the seals and slammed the ground, summoning something. After the standard smoke cloud was a black and orange toad with dark markings around its eyes and mouth and a circular mark just below its mouth, and it looked like it was wearing an obi. The toad looked around before looking at Jiraiya and then at Naruto, then turned back to the Hokage's student. Jiraiya, what is going on here? It asked Jiraiya, and it sounded male. Garotora, he needs the key, Jiraiya said to the now named Garotora. What? Why? Garotora asked him, shocked. It seems that the kid is ready to fight the fox for its chakra, Jiraiya said as Garotora looked over to Naruto with narrowed eyes before his body expanded into a scroll. As the scroll body opened, showing a Fuinjutsu formula over the scroll portion of his body, Naruto looked at it before seeing a square. Naruto then started to float up to the square and placed his hand in the square, and then the Fuinjutsu formula started to move across the scroll and onto Naruto's arm until the scroll part of Garotora was empty of the Fuinjutsu formula. Well, it seems my job is done, Garotora said as the scroll rolled up and he returned home. Jiraiya turned to Naruto, who had floated back down to the ground, bit his thumb and slammed his hand on the ground. Kuchios, Sumi Food Kitsune. Naruto called out two pure white Pharusian foxes with ink brush-like tails, with black on the end that seemed to be dripping with some ink. Yoko, Aiko, I need a septagram seal with a 7-input overlay that allows training on the out and in, Naruto told the foxes, who nodded and started to run around the area around him. Naruto sat down, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes as the foxes zoomed past him. Flames formed atop the wooden towers as Jiraiya looked at Tiger. What's happening? He asked the Anbu. He's now in his mind, Tiger told him. Naruto's inner world. Naruto opened his eyes as he stood in a sewer with water up to his ankles and started walking to a place he had only been to once. He walked up to a pair of enormous gates that took up the entirety of the back wall. And behind the gates, a pair of red eyes opened. So my jailer has come to visit, it said as I moved up to the gates. When it was by the light, it showed that it was a red-orange colored kitsune with black fur around its red eyes that stretched up to its ears and 9 long swiping tails. It also had the upper body structure of a human, complete with opposable thumbs on its clawed hands. It was the Kyuubi. The Kyuubi looked at Naruto before narrowing its eyes at him. Where is the real you? It asked Naruto. The real me? Naruto asked as he started to float up to the gates. You looking at him? Naruto said as he took hold of the paper on the gates. He then tore it off as the Kyuubi stood up, and Naruto let the kosode flow around his waist, showing his camp shirt, which had the words Camp Half-Blood in black lettering with a Pegasus in the middle of his shirt. He then pulled up his shirt to show his seal and held out a hand as the Fuinjutsu formula he gained from Garotora formed on the arm. So you're going to try to take my chakra from me? The Kyuubi asked him. The demigod locked eyes with the kitsune. I would like for us to work together as one, but I have a feeling that I must show you my strength and resolve to do so, Naruto said as he laughed. Then shall we test your mettle? The Kyuubi said to him as Naruto slammed his hand that held the Fuinjutsu formula onto the seal. Naruto moved away from the gate as the Kyuubi forced open the gates with its claws. Naruto landed on the ground. As both of them locked eyes once more, the Kyuubi gathered chakra into its mouth, forming a ball of chakra in front of its mouth, and Naruto jumped at it with his heel in the air before he brought it down on the fox's head. The floor beneath the fox cracked as it swung one of its tails and hit Naruto, who took hold of something light orange before jumping back and pulling something out that looked like a ghostly image of the fox. Naruto then holds his left arm straight out in front with his palm facing the fox as his arm rotates inward and his wrist opens like a door hinge. The hole in his left hand opens up to reveal a gun sight that Naruto can aim at the Kyuubi with it and shoot a giant ball of iron at it. The fox batted it away with one of its tails as Naruto started to shoot small mortar shells out of the cannon part of his arm that exploded into the face of the Kyuubi. It raised one of its claws, swiped, and slashed out at the air, sending a hurricane at Naruto. Kimono Kenryu Hikotaka. Naruto called out as he slashed at the air with Yodo with an arcing blade of wind that cut through the hurricane and cut into the fox, who roared. So it seems that we're done with our warm-up, the fox said as it gathered chakra in his mouth and shot a beam at Naruto. Doten. Doryuheki. Naruto called out as a wall rose out of the ground with heads of various animals that met with the beam. Naruto kept the snake seal as he constantly removed the wall from the beam that the Kyuubi sent at him. Once the beam was over, Naruto formed the bird seal as the rock wall turned into a spike that shot forward into the fox's shoulder. Why don't you use your chains? The Kyuubi asked Naruto, who looked back. I know that I'll win easily with them, and I'm supposed to train for 2.5 months with the seal that I have asked Yoko and Aiko to make, and it is the one that my outer body is within, and the fighting between us translates to my outer body's training, Naruto told it as the fox smiled down at Naruto. And it was a savage smile full of teeth, so in the name of the sage, I will not use the chains against you, and I will win, he told it as the smile turned from savage to sincere. And it started to laugh with deep laughter before it looked back down at Naruto. Spoken like a true Uzumaki, the Kyuubi told Naruto, who looked up at the fox. Now back up those words, it said as it swung one of its tails at Naruto. Shinra Tensei. Naruto called out as he ended with a blast of force that pushed the tail away from him. Doten. Yomi Numa. Naruto called out after he went through 2 hand seals and then beneath the fox was then sunk into the ground deep. Naruto then shot his hand as a ghostly hand, gripped it, pulled out and started to pull back. Did you really think it would be that easy? The Kyuubi asked Naruto as it started to glow red and red chakra shot out at Naruto. Naruto then let it go. I had hoped. Naruto told it as the fox smiled at Naruto, who summoned a horde of clones. Naruto then nodded as the clones started to run at the Kyuubi, each of them taking a handful of the chakra and then beginning to pull. So going for the army tactic, the Kyuubi asked the clones as it started to pull itself out of the mud that it was stuck in. Still, Naruto was above the fox once more with his heel aimed at the fox's head once more, forcing it back into the mud. Trying that once more, the fox asked Naruto as it swung its tail at Naruto. But this time, Naruto sent the tail away from him with another Shinra Tensei and then slammed his fist into the fox's head, dazing it. The clones started to pull chakra out of the fox, but one of the tails slammed onto a small portion of the dispersing them. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the tails and summoned more clones who jumped off the head, each going through the same hand seals and arms of rock shot out of the ground and held the tails down. As the Kyuubi tried to move its tails, each of the clones kept the tiger seals, ensuring that the fox did not break out of the binds they had put it in. Pull now while you can, the real Naruto yelled out to the clones, who did as they were told. The fox looked up at Naruto with its red eyes. Meeting Naruto, it seems that you came here with a plan, it told Naruto and did not try to move. Yes, I knew that I would need to restrict your movements, so I trapped you in the swamp and then stopped you from attacking me with your tails by binding them down, Naruto told it as he looked down. The Naruto clones started pulling the chakra out of the fox, and the Kyuubi gained a gentle smile. It seems that you have come in here with a good plan, the fox said, and it could not move its tails as the rocks were binding its tails and it could not twitch them. Its arms, legs, and belly were stuck in mud that was hard to escape. But you have not won this yet. It told Naruto as something started to form out of Naruto's shadow. Naruto turned to see that it was a girl around his age with pale skin, long black hair flowing behind her and red eyes. She had a well-endowed chest and did not have a hint of clothing on her, but ornate black markings covered her body. Yoto, Naruto said as the girl nodded. Yes, master, she said as her sword form appeared in her hand and got into an attack stance. And a sword appeared next to Naruto. I am aiding the fox here, but as your weapon, I cannot let you go into battle without something, Yoto told Naruto as Naruto took the sword and nodded. Yoto sped away and disappeared from Naruto's view before Yoto appeared above Naruto, with wind swirling around her sword. Kimono Kenryu Hachidori Kazaha. Yoto called out as she slashed at the air, sending a high-speed wind blade at Naruto. Naruto gathered a cyclone around him as he jumped at Yoto and spun in the air, forming a hurricane and sending out blades of wind from the hurricane. Yoto's sword burst into flames that were in all of the wind that Naruto generated. Kimono Kenryu Haijutsu. Daibingu-hu, she called out as she slashed at Naruto with an overhead slash with her burning blade. Naruto sent a blast of air from his feet to push him away from Yoto's sword, but the tip cut through Naruto's skin and went from his right shoulder to his left hip. Training Ground 0. As Naruto sat in the middle of a large seal with Tiger, Jiraiya and the two foxes that Naruto summoned watched before the foxes sniffed at the air. It seems that we did a good job with the seal, one of them said as Jiraiya turned to the fox with a raised brow. What do you mean? He asked them. The fox turned to the older human, the slight smell of blood in the air, and having him ask us to make sure that his training and the fighting that he goes through in him added up to real-life training, they told him before they returned to the summoning realm. Why would he want that type of seal? Tiger asked as he looked at the blonde going crimson. Think about it, Jiraiya said as Tiger turned to him. Who better to train with than a Biju? Jiraiya said as Tiger looked shocked before nodding. Excuse me, someone said as both Jiraiya and Tiger turned to see Kakashi standing behind them with Sasuke. Is it alright if we train here? Kakashi asked them. Jiraiya looked over to Tiger, and once he heard a hand twitch, he looked back over to Kakashi. No, this is the cage personal training ground that we have been given access to, thanks to Sensei, Jiraiya told Kakashi. Now, there is no need for that, as they are both on the same team, Kakashi said but felt a kunai at his throat. He turned to see Jiraiya holding the kunai. Let me rephrase what I said, Jiraiya said as he looked Kakashi in the eye. This training ground is for those of the Hokage, and those that the Hokage allow to use it, so leave before I kill you and the Uchiha for trespassing on this training ground, Jiraiya said as Kakashi could tell that Jiraiya was not kidding and nodded. Jiraiya pulled his kunai away from Kakashi's throat as Kakashi started to walk away. Naruto's inner world. Naruto and Yoto had their blades locked together, and both had an element covering their swords as they stood on the head of the Kyuubi. Naruto's sword was covered in water, while Yoto's was covered in flames. The clones were making good ground. Seeing that neither of the blades would move, Naruto moved out of the stalemate and slashed at Yoto's wrists, cutting them and almost dropping her sword form. Naruto then started charging at Yoto with his sword thrust forward, but Yoto blocked the strike, but she lost her sword as Naruto took hold of the blade. Naruto then spun the blades around until the tips of both swords were pointed to the left as the aura of a saber-toothed cat formed behind him. Kimono Kenryu Kanhanako Nagiri. Naruto called out as he sent out two chakra slashes that sent Yoto flying off the Kyuubi. Naruto jumped after her and moved both blades behind his back as he looked at Yoto. Kimono Kenryu Hyena Hoko. Naruto called out as he brought down both swords on Yoto, and once both blades hit the sword spirit, a loud shockwave from and shot Yoto into the ground. Naruto kicked at the air, allowing him to go further into the air above the Kyuubi with his arms out and both swords pointed to the ground. Naruto's swords then burst into flames before he started to fall in the direction of the Kyuubi. The blades grew, slashed both his swords and then cut at the Kyuubi, sending out a shockwave of flames. The Kyuubi pulled its head back as the clones finished pulling the chakra out of and all the clones started to disperse. The chakra then started to be pulled into Naruto. Naruto gets covered in a golden chakra that flickers like flames. He gained 2 horns on his head, 6 magatama markings around his neck, a swirl design over his stomach that was like the seal that was on his stomach, and various other lines extending along their body. Naruto looked at his body as the bond that held the tails in place crumbled as the clones controlling it were gone. Naruto looked at the fox and found it looked like it was malunited and was just bone. "Are you?" Naruto asked as he looked at Naruto with fresh eyes. As to the fox's eyes, it did not see Naruto. No, it saw its father. The Kyuubi got up slowly, and since Naruto stopped sending chakra to the mud that was pulling it in, it pulled itself out of the swap. "I'll be fine. Finish the seal," it told Naruto. Naruto nodded as he placed a hand on his seal before turning it as his inner world changed. The ceiling of the sewer grew out, and the light in there became brighter as the stone started turning into a blue sky. The water beneath the 3 within Naruto's soul started to rush towards the gigantic fox, and lush green grass grew, making a large grass field under a clear blue sky with a bright sun shining. The water formed a moat around the Kyuubi as Torii gates fell from the sky around the island that the fox was on, and 4 more gates fell behind Naruto, which held a giant orb of chakra that was from the Kyuubi. Both Naruto and the fox kept eye contact as this was happening before the Kyuubi laid its head down. "It will take a few days before I can teach you how to use my chakra, so tell the woodman and the toad man that I will aid you in that training in 2 days, and they can handle the rest," it told Naruto, who looked shocked. "You're willing to help me?" Naruto asked. The fox turned its gaze to the sky. "If father has said you are the one, then I shall place my bets on you as well and aid you where I can," the Kyuubi told Naruto, who nodded. "Master," Yodo called out as he turned to her. "You did well fighting me, and with that, you have unlocked the first stage of me," she told Naruto, who nodded but looked confused. "What do you mean the first stage?" Naruto asked her. "I devour the swords of those that I defeat so I can take many forms," Yodo told him as Naruto nodded, "and I can call a second blade for you to use," she added. Naruto nodded. "I understand," he said before turning to the fox. "Before I leave, can I ask what your name is?" Naruto asked the fox, who smiled down at Naruto. "Kurama," it answered as Naruto vanished from his inner world. Training Ground 0. Naruto opened his eyes as he felt the chakra exhaustion and the cut that his sword gave him. And so he fell back. "I'm exhausted," Naruto said as Jiraiya approached him. "Well, from what I would get from the seal, you got what you wanted," he told Naruto. "So how did it go?" he asked the Uzumaki. "I now have access to Kurama's chakra," Naruto said as he did not sit up. "Kurama?" Tiger asked as he walked over. "All the Biju have names, and the Kyuubis is Kurama," Naruto said as he slowly started to sit up. "And I must have used all of my chakra in making sure that I got its chakra," Naruto said as Jiraiya nodded. "That makes sense. As you were fighting a Biju," the sage said as he helped Naruto to his feet. "So are we going to train you to use its chakra?" the sage asked him, but Naruto shook his head. "Kurama said that they'll be alright in a few days, and then they'll train me so you two can handle the other parts of training," Naruto said as both nodded. "So what are you going to do?" Naruto asked Jiraiya. Jiraiya turned to Tiger and nodded as the Anbu when thou hand seals before calling out, "Doten, Doryu Joheki." A large part of the earth beneath Tiger started to rise up in the air, making a large cliff face. "Suiten, Takatsubo no Jutsu," Tiger then called out as the cliff face turned into a waterfall. Tiger informed me of your taijutsu, and from what I could understand from it, you need full body training, Jiraiya told Naruto, who nodded. So we'll start with arm and upper body training as I want you to climb this cliff face, and I want you to do it within 3 minutes, Jiraiya told Naruto, who nodded as he walked over to the wall. Training ground 5. Kat and Sakura stood on an empty training ground as Kat was going through kata and had Sakura follow her. Again, Kat said as she walked over and slightly corrected Sakura's footing. Yes, Kat-sensei, Sakura said, going through the movements again. Kat watched Sakura and smiled behind her mask before another Anbu appeared next to her, and this one was wearing a panda mask. Panda, sorry to ask you to do this on such short notice, Kat said as she turned to her fellow female Anbu. It's all right, Kat, Panda said as she looked at Sakura, who was going through kata. So what am I teaching her? She asked Kat. Medical ninjutsu, and if we have time, probably haki and rokushiki, Kat said as Panda nodded as she looked at Sakura. What does she know? Panda asked Kat. Hardly anything, but she has somehow managed to pick up chakra-enhanced strength. Mujin Maisai and made her own jutsu, Kat said as Panda nodded. So the rumor is true that Kakashi robbed the ball of his students, Panda said as Kat nodded. Kat said as she shook her head. He wanted to make sure that Yondaime-sama's son was looked after, but as soon as the Uchiha clan was brought to the edge, he changed gears and started to help the Uchiha, Kat added as Panda nodded sadly. Border of Land of Earth and Land of Fire. Kakashi was standing on a large pillar of rock as he watched over Sasuke as lightning started to gather in his hand. Hokage-sama will forgive me when Sasuke wins the exams, Kakashi thought as he looked at Sasuke. Keep him strong. Train him. Make the Uchiha strong once more, Kakashi heard as he watched Sasuke. Later in the day, Konoha. Naruto was walking down the road to the Phoenix Bar, where Hana Inuzuka was waiting for him as she sat in a seat on the outside, waiting for him. Kuno was lying on Naruto's shoulder as she looked at the 3 hounds near Hana. Hana looked over and saw him approach her as he sat across from her. Thank you for seeing me, she said. My training for the day was over, and you wanted to talk, Naruto told her as Hana nodded. Yes, I wanted to talk about what I did or did not do, Hana told him as Naruto looked at her with a raised brow. I know that if I apologize, it will not make up for the last 12 years, Hana said as Naruto nodded. There was a reason why I did nothing, and it's not even a good reason, Hana said. And that is? Naruto asked her. Hana said nothing but looked down as 2 drinks arrived for them before Hana looked back up at Naruto. I was afraid, she told him. Of me? He asked her, but she shook her head. Then what were you afraid of? Naruto asked her. I was told if I were to look after you, I would be banished from the Inuzuka clan by one of the elders, Hana told him as Naruto narrowed his eyes. And while sensei would have accepted that I could not do that, and I soon started to hate you for the fact that you were alive while she was not, Hana told him. Naruto said nothing as he just listened to her. Over the years, my hate grew and grew. I joined in on the fox hunts that would go after, and while I did not hurt you, I led them to you, Hana said as tears started to fall from her eyes. A part of me was dying each time I would join a fox hunt, Hana told him. Naruto listened to her and said nothing as the hounds at Hana's feet looked at her. What changed? Naruto asked her. It was the day that sensei showed up in the compound, Hana said as Naruto nodded. It then dropped like a ton of bricks. I failed not only my sensei but my godmother, Hana said as Naruto sighed. Naruto picked up his drink and took a sip of his drink. So, where are we going to go from here? Naruto asked her. Hana looked up at him. Mom told me that you made a vow on the river Styx, he said as Hana nodded. Do you know the vow that I made? Hana asked him as Naruto nodded. Then what are you going to do? She asked the Uzumaki. Naruto looked over to the Hokage mountain that had the faces of the previous cage of Konoha before he settled on the last face on the rock face. Sakura and I have talked about this, and we found out when word gets to the council about me being my mother's son, I will be placed under CRA, but the number that is given to me will have a limit put on it. Naruto told her as Hana nodded as she already knew this. And while I do not like it as I am with Sakura, I believe that you deserve a second chance, so I believe that we can get to know each other, Naruto said as Hana smiled, but Naruto held up 3 fingers. But they will also do that because of the Rinnegan, Naruto thought. But it must be on 3 conditions, he told her as she nodded. Anything, she told him. The first is I would like for you to give me the names of everyone who joined you during the fox hunts. The second would be an aid in training with a ninja animal, and the third is something that can help Sakura with her training, Naruto said as Hana looked surprised by his conditions but nodded. I get the list of names, and I can join your training next week if that's right, Hana asked Naruto, who nodded. As for helping your girlfriend, I may have to ask Kurenai if she can see if she can aid in her training, as it would make up for not being there for you, as I am mainly a taijutsu just in my clan, Hana told him. That's fair, Naruto said before he looked across the road to see the Ikibi's Jinchuriki walking down the street. Hana saw who he was looking at. Why is he like that and not like you? She asked him as Naruto turned to her. From what Kurama, my Biju's name, told me is that it's a mixture of Shitsuna sealing and the Ikibi itself, Naruto told her. Hana looked confused. Why are they sealing? She asked him. The seal that they use is the same seal for each Jinchuriki, and it does the same thing each time, Naruto told her as Hana nodded. Only hold the Biju, nothing else, Naruto said as Hana looked even more confused. Isn't that what a seal is supposed to do? She asked him. Yes and no, Naruto said as he looked at her. You see, the seal that is placed on a Jinchuriki needs to do 4 things. The first is to seal the Biju. The second is to allow the Jinchuriki to access the Biju's ability. The third is to allow the Biju's chakra to integrate with the chakra of the Jinchuriki fully. And finally it is to stop the Biju's influence, Naruto explained to her. And Sunas don't do all that? She asked him. No, at best, it can only do 2 of those things, Naruto said as they returned to their drinks. The next day, Training Ground 5. Cat and Panda watched Sakura go through a series of taijutsu stances, and Cat nodded. She's doing well, Panda said as she saw that Cat was holding something behind her. What's that? She asked. If she is going to be with Naruto, I'm going to teach her Kenjutsu, Cat said as Panda looked shocked. What sword are you giving her? Panda said as Cat placed the item she held onto the ground. Panda saw she was holding a wooden box before she looked up to her pink-haired student, Sakura. Cat called out as Sakura stopped her taijutsu stances. I have a gift for you, Cat said as Sakura walked over to Cat. What is it, Cat-sensei? Sakura asked her as the Anbu opened the box to show 2 swords. Sakura. Here are 2 swords that have been passed down from my sensei to me, and I would like to pass them down to you, Cat said as he held up the first sword. This is Tenju, Cat said as she passed the sword over to Sakura. Tenju was a standard katana with a silver blade with a blue wave-like pattern, and the cross guard was an abstract shape with 8 points with an overlapping design. Each plate had a navy blue core with a silver border. The sword's hilt is wrapped in a white cloth with a short length of white chain with a broken link. Sakura took Tenju into her hand. Do some test swings, Panda told her as Sakura nodded. She went through some swings before she slashed at the ground, and a blade of water shot out and cut into the ground. Tenju was a blade that was forged with water-release chakra throughout the forging process, Kat said as she handed Sakura the other sword. This blade is Maju, she told Sakura. Maju, like Tenju, was a standard katana, but this one had a black blade with a red flame-like pattern, and the cross guard was an abstract shape with 8 points with an overlapping design. Each plate had a crimson-red core with a black border. The sword's hilt is wrapped in a black cloth with a short length of black chain with a broken link. Is it like Tenju? Sakura asked Kat as the Anbu nodded. Yes, but instead of water-release chakra, it is made with fire-release chakra, Kat told her as Sakura nodded. I'm going to teach the kenjutsu style that my sensei had taught me, and you can pass on to the ones that you can teach one day, Kat told her. Well, start with Tenju, Kat said as she drew her sword, faced away from Sakura, and held her sword above her head. Sakura also held her sword above her head, and then both brought the blades down to the left and up to the front of them before going to the right. Again, Kat said as they went through the stances again. Panda walked over and corrected Sakura's stance, and Sakura started to move through the stances. Good. You have managed to get them down, Panda said before she drew her sword. Let's see if you can keep up with me if I make sure that I go Genin speed, Panda said as Sakura nodded. But her legs did start shaking. Training ground 0. Naruto was climbing the giant cliff that Tiger had made the day before with both Tiger and Jiraiya watching from below him on the ground. He's doing good, Tiger said as Jiraiya nodded his head. That he is, the sage said as he looked up at the Uzumaki. The next round, he's going to have his left arm bound, Jiraiya said as Tiger nodded. The crunching of grass drew both men as they turned to find Hana and Sume walking over with their hounds. So where is the kid? Sume said as the sage pointed up. Both Inuzuka looked up, and they saw him climbing up the cliffside. Ah, the Gake Nobori no Gyo, Sume said as Hana looked shocked by what she was looking at. Not even I can do that, Hana said as she looked up at Sume. And why not? She asked her daughter. Kush Artemis sensei never got round to teaching me how to do it, Hana told her mother as Sume nodded. That's fair, she said before looking at her oldest child. Get your up there, Sume told her. But, Hana said, but Sume narrowed her eyes at her child before Hana sulked as she walked over to the cliff face. You have to send chakra to a part of your body like with the Ki Nobori no Shugyo and Suiro no Jutsu, but your fingertips instead of your feet, Jiraiya explained to the teen. As Hana nodded, the hound walked over to try and join their partner, but Sume stopped them. Hana has to do this by herself, she told the hounds as they nodded. Hana started to climb up to the cliff face as Naruto was making his way down. You come here often? Hana asked him as Naruto looked shocked. But he also lost concentration and slipped and fell into the small lake of water before them. Naruto popped his head out of the water as Jiraiya looked at him. Get your back up there, Geki, the sage told him as Naruto nodded and started to climb back up the cliff face. So what are you teaching the kid? Sume asked the two of them. The fox, Tiger started. Kurama, Naruto yelled down. Kurama is going to teach Naruto how to use its chakra, Tiger said as Sume nodded. I'm going to show the kid how to fight alongside his summons while Tiger here is going to teach him how to use wood release, Jiraiya told Sume as the woman nodded. That makes sense, the woman said before she looked at him. So then I'll teach him how to fight alongside his ninja animal, Sume said as she looked at the small fox looking up at Naruto. Sume's hound walked over to Kuno. So what can you do? The hound asked the fox. I can use Kitsune no Hai, that the dragons taught me how to use, she told the older four-legged animal. Kuromaru, Sume asked her hound as the Ninken turned to her. She knows something called Kitsune no Hai, Kuromaru told Sume as the woman nodded. She then turned to look at both Naruto and Hana to find that Naruto was almost down as Hana was breathing hard. That girl, Tsume huffed. If Artemis-sama were here, she would whip the dog girl into shape, Kuno said as she looked up. True, Kuromaru said as Tsume looked at her hound and raised a brow at him. The vixen said that if Artemis-sama were here, she would whip Hana into shape, he said as Tsume nodded. You're right, the woman said as Jiraiya walked over to Naruto. Now that you've gotten to this point, it's time to strap an arm behind your back, he told his student as he pulled out a rope and then looked at Naruto. Your right hand is your dominant arm, right? He asked as Naruto thought for a second. There, both my dominant arms as I'm ambidextrous, Naruto said as Jiraiya nodded slightly, wincing. Then this is going to be difficult, the sage muttered before looking at Naruto's arms. All right then, which arm do you use the least? He asked Naruto as the Uzumaki held out his left arm. All right then, we'll tie your right arm so that your left arm will gain muscle that is on par with your right, Jiraiya said as the sage tied Naruto's right arm behind his back. Now do another 100, and each time you fall that's another 10, he told his student before a splash was heard next to them as they turned to see Hana popping her head out of the water. That goes for you too, Hana, Tsume called out as Hana rolled her eyes at her mother. The next day. Naruto sat in front of Tsume with Kuno on his shoulder, and their eyes were closed. Focus on each other, Tsume said as she looked at both Fox and Boy. Feel the connection to each other. Let it sink in, she told them as the wind blew in Naruto's hair and Kuno's fur. Naruto breathed in and then breathed out. Kuno then breathed in and breathed out. You need to be as one mind, but you share two bodies, Tsume told them. Naruto breathed in and then breathed out. Kuno then breathed in and breathed out. And then, as one, they both breathed in and then out. Good. You are on the same level as each other, Tsume said as both Boy and Fox were breathing in sync. They both then opened their eyes to show that Naruto had slit pupils and Kuno had slit pupils as well as they looked at Tsume. Now then, let's see if you can fight as one, she said as Naruto stood up. The next day. So this is the Kyuubi's chakra, Tsume said as she looked at Naruto, who was covered in golden yellow-orange-like flames with 2 horns of chakra along with 6 black magatama markings around his neck, a black swirl design over his stomach that was like the seal that was on his stomach. So, from what I can get, you need to let your body get accustomed to using Kurama's chakra, Tiger said as he felt stronger being close to Naruto like he was. Yeah, Kurama said that I need to be able to hold something with a tailed beast chakra arm without the object being destroyed by the chakra, Naruto told Tiger, who nodded. Naruto then closed his eyes as 2 long arms of golden yellow-orange chakra formed from his back. And Jiraiya boy, is that why you asked me to bring this statue here? A green toad with white hair styled in somewhat of a mohawk, very thick eyebrows and a small goatee, and he had a high-collared cape. Next to him was a giant stone statue of a toad meditating. Yes, Pa, Jiraiya said as the toad nodded. Naruto stretched their arms out as they took hold of the statue as the toad looked at the process. Ease your mind, Naruto boy, he told Naruto, who nodded. Fukasaku-sama, what was the matter? Hana asked as she looked down at the toad. His mind was a little bit chaotic as he was focusing on lifting the statue. Fukasaku, now named Fukasaku, told the teenage Inuzuka. They watched as Naruto lifted the statue slowly but was seemingly struggling to lift the statue. Think of it as if it is your chakra forming a ninjutsu, Fukasaku told Naruto, who nodded. The struggle that was on his face was gone. He is making good progress, Tsume said before cracking could be heard. Everyone turned to see that the statue was gaining cracks before it exploded into dust. But this will take time, she added as Fukasaku looked troubled. Ma is going to have my head when she finds out what happened, he said as he looked at the remains of the statue. But this I can work with, he said as he stroked his goatee. Seeing the look into the toad's eye, Jiraiya could not help but ask, "What are you planning, Pa?" "I shall return to Mount Myoboku and inform Ma about Minato's son and tell her that I am training him and then return with another statue," Fukasaku said as Jiraiya looked shocked but nodded.